Welcome to the Dignity of Women, where we dig deep into the vocation and dignity of women in the church in modern times and as an answer to the call for a new evangelization. I'm your host, Kimberly Cook. Joining me today is Dr. Deborah Savage. Dr. Deborah Savage is a professor of theology at Franciscan University of Steubenville, where she has recently formed the Institute for the Study of Man and Woman. She is a student of St. Thomas Aquinas and a recognized scholar of the work of Pope St. John Paul II. Dr. Savage is the co-founder and former director of the Siena Symposium for Women, Family, and Culture at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota, an interdisciplinary think tank organized to respond to John Paul II's call for a new and explicitly Christian feminism. Dr. Savage's mission is to recover a culture of life by building an account of man and woman that's coherent and scientifically and theologically grounded. Thank you so much for being with us today, Dr. Savage.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure.
I wanted to start by talking about the mission of the Institute for the Study of Man and Woman, an exciting new program that you have just begun at Franciscan University. The mission of the Institute is to pursue a robust, coherent account of the nature of man and woman, both in themselves and in relation to one another. Can you tell us what prompted you to begin the Institute and what is lacking in the understanding of the nature of man and woman?
To begin with, my observation is that, let me start by pointing out, there's almost 1,000 women's studies programs throughout the world, most of them left-leaning, in universities all over, right?
That's right.
If you ask them, what about the men? If you bring that up, their basic response, I've asked a few women connected with that thing, meh, what about the men? They don't need our help. They don't need any help, apparently.
Right. They know who they are. Apparently, it's women who are confused.
Or something. It's ridiculous, actually, because it's not true, and it's becoming really apparent in our culture today that men are drowning. Mm-hmm. Men are really, they've become uncertain about what women want, but also it's always been true, and it will be eternally true, that you can't understand woman apart from man. They come as a kind of pair. And there's more that we can say about that theologically and philosophically, even scientifically. But I started out writing, like many did, about the feminine genius and so on. I got often asked to give talks on that. And then I noticed that what really happens is this, what I would think of now as a strange kind of Catholic feminism. We talk about how stupid our husbands are and, how men are so inept and so on. And especially if there's wine involved, if it's a dinner. And, I stopped giving talks on that because what I did was I realized that there's a lacuna, there's something missing. John Paul II does speak eloquently about the feminine genius, but doesn't say much about the men. And so I was developing a theory out of Genesis already, but I realized one day, I said, why isn't there anything about man, right? And so my immediate thought was, well, wait a second, you can't really write about men, you're a girl. And then I realized that JP2 wrote about me.
Right.
And what I learned is that I can say things about men that men cannot.
Right.
And I think that they need our help. And I don't mean that in a patronizing way. They're just as uncertain about who they are as women might be, perhaps even more so.
I think it's the opposite than patronizing. Yeah. I think it's actually encouraging to them that somebody's finally taking the charge for their side because, as you said, you've challenged or at least asked some of these women scholars, right? A lot of left-leaning scholars in different universities who are teaching these women's classes. And when you bring up the men, they brush it aside very quickly as unnecessary. Yeah. But yet you're finally taking up the pen and taking up the charge to speak about what I had not heard before, which is the masculine genius. And obviously, if there's a feminine genius, there's got to be a masculine genius. But nobody's really going there. And as you said, even maybe women that are talking in the Catholic Church about the feminine genius don't really want to look at the flip side of the coin, or maybe they don't really think it's necessary to look at the flip side of the coin, which is the masculine.
That's very true, even in Catholic circles. So I won't name the university, but there is a Catholic university in the U.S. that has started a program that's an attempt at creating a kind of Catholic version of what you might call gender studies. And it's called Catholic Women's and Gender Studies. And not only am I not certain about what that actually means.
Right. Why would what genders are we talking?
Right. But I asked the same question of the person coordinating that program. What about the men? And she said exactly the same thing. What about the men? And that was frankly what prompted me to march down the hall here at Franciscan to the Vice President of Academic Affairs and say, we have to do this. This is crazy. It's kind of a cosmic blind spot because, you know, I can explain why, but you can just take it as gospel that you can't understand one without the other.
And when you talk about that complementarity with these people that you're discussing, what is their reaction when you say you can't understand woman without man? Is that almost like a blasphemy?
No, it's all of a sudden their eyes open wide and they go, oh my gosh, you're right. Once you realize it, you can see that it's been missing. And like I say, it's kind of a cosmic lacuna because I can't understand at all why it's not self-evident to everybody. And partly it's a blind spot because we're so concerned about women. John Paul II quite rightly lifted them up because mistakes have been made. But he says in Christi Fidelis Laici, number 50, anybody out there, you can look it up. He says, the only way for women to find their place in the world, for us to understand what that is a deeper and more penetrating anthropological study of the nature of man and woman. And I read that years ago, and I've been working on this for pretty much 15 years. This account. So I returned to Genesis and derived both a masculine and feminine genius from Genesis 1 and 2. They're both connected to the order of creation. I'm integrating it in with the theology of the body, but I go further than what he states there.
Which is neat that you took it even a step farther, because you do talk about how St. John Paul II is the person who influenced you with a lot of the works that he had written. Yeah. And then you were able to use that and go develop those even further in areas that he hadn't yet developed.
One scholar can't do everything.
Right.
And his project is begging for completion. I mean, the theology of the body is incredibly profound. There's no question about it. We'll never get to the bottom of everything that he says, but, you know, there's much more to do. The project is not yet finished, at least when it comes to a full account of man and woman, because, Kimberly, it's also a scientific question. The neuroscience, the biology, the social science, all of those things, psychology.
Absolutely. He was just plowing the field and starting to plant the seeds in a way, and there's a lot more work left to do. And you're one of the laborers out there in the vineyard who's bringing some beautiful fruit, in my opinion.
Well, let's hope so. I really do think that it's central to our efforts to recover a culture of life, to save the world even, especially in light of the mess we're in our culture.
Yes, we need some undoing of the knots that we have made as a culture.
Yeah.
And so to the point of John Paul II, he said, the condition that will assure the rightful presence of woman in the church and in society is a more penetrating and accurate consideration of the anthropological foundation for masculinity and femininity. You had just said that this quote was one of the main pieces in the puzzle for you and connecting the dots of what you were called to do with the work that you've done for the past 15 years. Can you tell us how you interpret that quote that John Paul II said?
Oh, well, I take it pretty literally. And I have to admit that I read that quote sometime after I'd already begun to develop a theory from Genesis, not divorced from the theology of the body, but one that's taken a more comprehensive direction, I suppose. And then I read that. I was astonished. I mean, Christi Fidelis Laici came out, in 1987, actually. It was after pretty early, actually, in his pontificate, because it was after the Synod of Bishops on the role of the laity. So he's very clear. If you're interested about understanding where women fit, the only way you're going to get there is by understanding man and woman. Sounds
Right.
good to me, because that's what I was already doing. And the church, he tells us in Mulieris Dignitatem that at that same synod, the bishops asked that fundamental question, and the church puts it in the simplest terms. Why did God make us male and female? And what are the
Yes.
implications of that decision? Why did God make us male and female? And what are the implications of that decision? And that's really sort of not really the tagline for the Institute, but those are the questions that we're pursuing. Why?
How would you answer that simply? I mean, as you
Yes.
said, it could go on and on, but how would you answer that to someone? It seems like an obvious question with an obvious answer, but as we all know, it is no longer obvious at all. And
Right.
even the idea that he did create us male and female is ambiguous, right? I mean, we don't even know as a society that he did in fact just create us male and female, because there's so many other options on the table now that that's really convoluted. And there's a certain sect of people that would absolutely believe that that is not truth, to say that there are only two genders.
Right, but that's just, sorry to say, that's wrong.
Yeah.
Sorry. I think people have been persuaded, they've been blinded by an ideology that is simply contrary to the facts. Every cell in my body is feminine. Every cell in my husband's body is masculine.
So why did God choose that plan?
Okay. Well, I can quote JP2 again. I think this is a good place to start. He says that complementarity is what gives us our mission, which is to create not only human families, but human history. And it's easy to see in the home, in marriage, but not so easy to see how that works in the workplace, in politics, in public life. But one helpful way to look at it is introduced into this body of work by von Balthasar, who says that the fact that woman was created out of, or built more properly, out of Adam's rib is essential to understanding the relationship between man and woman. He says, unless that were the case, the union that is expressed in the marital act would be extrinsic. It would just be two bodies in a way, body and soul, but a fully human persons coming together. And that would be the only place where this unity could be understood or expressed.
Right.
But he says the fact that woman was made out of Adam's rib unites us substantially. We're joined at the hip. We're related to each other substantially for all of eternity. There is no way to understand man apart from woman, which we just assumed for many centuries, any more than there's any way to understand woman apart from man, because their roles are complementary, their bodies are complementary, their very being is complementary. One thing that needs to be said right away, though, is that, and John Paul's really clear about this, I am fully human. Men are fully human. I'm fully human. It's not like we add up to one human being. No, we're both instantiations, as the philosophers might say, embodiments of the same human soul.
Right.
A woman has, just as a man has equal parts, intellect, will, and freedom.
That dignity is the same. And
Absolutely.
John Paul II talked about that all the time, the
Yeah.
dignity of the human person,
Right.
male or female. And that's, of course, something that those people who are challenging gender norms or whatever they are in complementarity are challenging that, saying, well, if woman is this, which is different from man being that, then that somehow skews our dignity, and one is less and one is more. And that's been the argument, tale as old as time, right? Is that if somehow we are not equally the same in every area, then that difference skews our dignity, and it's no longer equal.
Yeah, it's an understanding of equality as though it meant the same. And that's not the right understanding of the use of that term. It's not a mathematical formula. We're both equally human. Equal to what, Equally human or equally human. And without that understanding, you have very little to go on. So we don't need to go very far down this road. But the whole mess began with Aristotle claiming that women were malformed males.
Yes, that opened a whole ugly
Right.
Pandora's box. It
Right.
really unleashed a lot for the radical feminists to work with, if you will. And it still continues to be referred back to, even in theological circles, when people are speaking more from the angle of John Paul II's complementarity and equal dignity of persons.
Well, sure. I mean, what I like to say is that the feminists don't even know who they're arguing with. And I use the word feminist kind of guardedly because I know that's a
Yes.
loaded term these days. But let's say the radical feminists, the
Mm-hmm.
ideological feminists. We've been struggling with this hidden assumption since 300 BC, right? So this idea that women are somehow less than men. And Aristotle has to be forgiven for this because he was caught in his own metaphysical categories, and we could go into that. And I'm sure if he were here right now, and if Aquinas were here right now, they'd be all over it because
Mm-hmm.
they just plain got the biology wrong. They didn't have a microscope. And so from what they could see, man was active, he was therefore the form, and woman was passive, she receives the semen. They just made a mistake. But unfortunately, that spread into the Western intellectual tradition, sort of like a hidden current that was never officially or formally challenged. So when feminism, it's let's say, or the women's rights movement began, that was still an implicit assumption that was made. And so it was hard to climb out of that trap. But if you look at Genesis 1 and 2, especially in regard to this question, Genesis 1 absolutely reveals, if you understand what the Hebrew author meant by the word Adam, that man and woman are equally human.
Right.
You can or you could go back to the Hebrew to prove it, but
Mm-hmm.
it's unmistakable. The first account is about man in the abstract sense, as John Paul II claims in the Theology of the Body, second audience, and it shows that the sacred author meant to imply that men and women were both created equally human.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. And when John Paul II spoke about women being the receivers, if you will, of so many things, I think for a lot of people, it was confusing because it seemed as a passive act. And for me, when I read it, it really shed a lot of light on the Blessed Mother, on her fiat, that was maybe some people saw it as passive when they're reading scripture, that she was a very passive person. She wasn't highlighted very much in the Bible. She didn't say much, she didn't do much, but her actions, as we know as Catholics, they were all active. Even when she's just speaking her permission for the Holy Spirit to come upon her, for God to do this work in her, her acceptance, her receptivity was active. And for me, when I understood this is not passive, this is active, that little understanding, it was like it unlocked this box that was so profound. And I understood scripture and the Blessed Mother in a completely different way when I understood that no, the Blessed Mother wasn't passive. This was an act.
She was receptive, and one needs to be in act in order to receive.
Right.
It's not passivity by any stretch of the imagination. And you can actually, if you understand who Mary was, you cannot claim that she was just a doormat.
Right.
That she just said,
Absolutely.
okay, just a naive ingenue just saying, okay, whatever you say, God, I'm willing to do whatever. No, and John Paul points to this in number 4 of Mulieris Dignitatem, where he says that she participated in her fiat with her personal and feminine eye.
Absolutely. Participate. She was a participant.
Yes, that personal and feminine I is a reference to his own anthropology. So what he's really saying there is that she understood that in that moment she was choosing freely. Her yes was an active yes. It wasn't whatever you say. It was yes. She was choosing freely, and she knew that in that moment she was determining who she would become. So if you really have to read between the lines a little bit there because he has something specific in mind. But think about it. Mary when the angel comes and says, Hail Mary, full of grace, she says, she doesn't run off screaming, she doesn't get confused. She says, well, this is a strange greeting. What kind of greeting might this be? And
Right.
then the angel says, this is what's going to happen. And she's, no, wait a second. I know something about this. You're going to have to explain this to me because I have not known man. She doesn't,
Right.
she's asking intelligent questions. And if it's true, and I believe it is, that she was born without sin, what kind of self-knowledge would she have had in that moment? It would have been extensive. No,
Right.
she knew. She knew. She didn't know the whole story or how it was all going to unfold, but she was definitely there for that action. She was active. Gertrude Lefort says receptivity is a force.
Wow, that's a
Woman,
great way to put it.
yes, it is a force in the cosmic scheme.
And I want to come back to mission in just a minute because you did
Sure.
talk about mission. But first, I want to ask about when we speak of a new and explicitly Christian feminism, which you did touch on. And I read that in the beginning in your introduction. So I want to delve a little bit more into that because there is divisive confusion regarding what this feminism looks like and how
Yeah.
it is compatible with Christianity. So
Yeah.
can you unpack that a little bit more in your experience
Sure.
and in your
Sure.
research?
Well, I think feminism is a really loaded term, and I am not personally persuaded that we can recover it or use it in any meaningful way as a
I
term.
agree.
I think there's people on, as I see it, kind of in two camps on this. And one camp says, well, feminism does not only refer to this sort of modern ideology. There's also a way in which it's grounded in a previous tradition, which actually began well before the Seneca Falls Convention and the suffragist movement and so on. The women that were writing at that time, Mary Wollstonecraft and others, really had in mind the Christian virtues and woman naturally gravitating toward those things that were kind of unique to her. There's something very fruitful and positive about that. And then there's others who are saying, no, feminism just as a whole, it's a bad thing. I think it's both and. I think, again, I don't think we can use that word, but those that are trying to recover it are not talking about the modern ideology.
Mm-hmm.
Their concern is that we're not making this distinction clear between this modern ideology, which is destructive and absolutely not compatible with Christianity because it
Right.
promotes abortion. Throw that
Yes.
out. But the movement toward us assessing and attending to women's rights and concerns certainly could be or should be, you know. Now, why is that a big deal? Well, because the young people, because they conflate the two, the feminist movement, the modern ideology has appropriated the first so-called first wave of feminism, which
Right.
includes people before Elizabeth Cady Stanton and others that some people want to argue were doing important work. The point is that because these are conflated, young people think that the Catholic Church doesn't have anything to say about so-called
Right.
feminism, and they're gravitating toward this more left-leaning, really vicious kind of understanding where women are supposed to fight for themselves, men are evil, etc. I think the project there is to reestablish a historical trajectory, understand it better, and correct this misunderstanding that the Christian viewpoint is very much in favor of women and their needs and their desires, their wish to develop their own potential. Jesus
Right.
himself elevated women, for heaven's sake, right? Distinguish that from this really evil and vicious attempt to turn women into productive beings, but not really women at all, in a sense of women that think they have to forego their fertility in order to be considered fully human or something, right?
That was the interesting part about John Paul II's
Yeah,
statement in Mulieris
yeah,
Dignitatem is when he called for that new feminism,
yeah.
right in the same breath, he also stated that this needs to be a feminism that welcomes life because that
Yes.
has really become the antithesis of modern feminism. When we think
Mm,
of modern feminism, radical
yeah.
feminism, ideological
Yes.
feminism, it goes hand in hand with Planned Parenthood
Right.
and opposing marriage, family, or women being even given the option to choose anything that would be considered traditional, wanting to be a mother or a wife in any traditional fabric of what that looked like for our mothers, grandmothers, or great grandmothers, right? If a woman is going to choose any of these things, it has to be on a new playing field, new terms, maybe no man involved, or maybe no marriage involved, or maybe if we are going to get married, and if I am going to choose something as traditional as marrying a man, for goodness sakes, then we've got to make this look somewhat radical, right? I mean, here we are, a woman, a man, we've got a baby now, we're in a home. I mean, come on, we've got to mix this up a little bit. Let's move to a flat in New York City and invite a few more people in or something, right? I mean, it's almost at the point where there's a fear of tradition, because if I want to embrace these ideologies such as feminism, they seem to be opposed. And so what you're talking about is so important, to bring this truth of the complementarity of women and man, what it means to be a woman, and also the importance of marriage and family to the human society that John Paul II spoke about. And when we are speaking of who woman is and what her role is in society, of course, as John Paul II said, we have to start with woman's openness to life, period. I mean, spiritual life, physical life, that is who woman is, right? That's her identity.
Yeah, no, that's right. I think I hope it's okay to mention this or put it this way on your podcast.
Absolutely.
But I think it's diabolical.
Yes.
This effort to destroy women. I mean, the men too are under attack. But what I say is that women lost their place, and so men lost theirs. There isn't any future for humanity if we don't get this straight. If men and women don't understand, they are not mortal enemies. They are collaborators in the great task of human living. And women need to understand the great gift that they have. Every human being on this planet must pass through the womb on their way to a human existence. There's no other entryway. What an enormous gift that is. What a privilege that is. It's certainly not reason. It's not logical. It's not coherent to claim that women should make their bodies more into men's in order to be more productive, in the workplace. We're just, so anyway, I think all of that is really true.
I guess we can return back to mission, because that is something that has really struck me in reading your work and hearing you speak, and some of the things you've said even so far on this podcast, because more than the loss of our complementarity, I think even further back than that is, what is our mission, right?
Yeah,
when we are here as woman and man, what is our mission? Clearly, it can't just be to live in some sort of cell of society that I choose. Women and men have this distinct complementarity and these distinct complementary missions in the world. What is the nature of woman in both the home and the world? Because that is something we struggle with all the time. Society, the Catholic Church, women in general. Where is my mission? Where is my role? And returning again to, what did God create me for? What is my purpose?
It's such a huge question. And I want to start by saying that the feminism debate, I know that some of my colleagues are going to be upset with me for saying this, because I respect their work. I respect everybody's work that is underway on that. I think it's simply time to transcend that word. Don't leave the effort behind, but let the word go, because no one understands any longer what it is. You have to define it. You have to add an adjective. No, not that kind of feminism. I mean, this kind of. So my work has been to answer the question, who is woman? Not what is woman, but who is woman? And who is man? Because we have to understand woman qua woman. Do you know what I mean by that? And man qua male. There's man per se. No one's ever met him, but we know he has a soul and a body that are united, and he has certain powers, and he has intellect, will, and freedom. That soul, that composite being, is instantiated in both men and women. Okay? So you're asking, what does it mean to be woman qua woman? Meaning, per se. It's going to show up in individual persons, individual women in different ways. But what are the things all women have sort of in common in their essence? You really have to see what's going on in Genesis 2 to have a starting place, to ground it in something. And so man is created first. The Hebraic author definitely meant us to understand that. But in the Hebraic understanding of the soul, Adam actually contains all of humanity. There is an oscillation between the one and the many. And so when we say man, the Hebraic author would have meant was man who contains the many. Okay, just hang in there with me. Everybody listening, hang in there for a second. Why does that matter? Because when woman emerges out of man's rib at Genesis 2:24, she emerges out of a unity already prefigured in man. So if you look at Michelangelo's famous painting of God touching man and bringing him to life, if you look at that carefully, you'll see that in the cloud behind God's head, some cherubim and well, mostly cherubs, right, is Eve. Eve is in the image. Michelangelo understood this, that she is prefigured in Adam. This is the Hebraic understanding of the soul. Nonetheless, the man, is put in the garden first, and he has to name everything, right? Because he and God both realize he's alone. So he has to name all the animals, all the things of creation. Something is missing with every step. But what has to be understood is that in doing so, in naming things, he takes dominion over them.
Right.
And
that's an authority.
I want to bring this up because I want to at least mention the masculine genius. I think the masculine genius is discernible in that passage because men excel. They're more oriented toward objects, towards the world, towards things outside of themselves. Women create in themselves, men create outside of themselves. Nothing could be more obvious. So men excel at naming things, at saying what can be predicated of those things, and a systematic way of arriving at the matter, which is really one reason why they created systems of philosophy, of law, of anatomy, why they invented things. Sure, there was oppression and women were left out in many ways we could talk about, but the fundamental gift that man brings to the world is to discern what the goods of creation are and what they are for. Man does not even understand what he's there for. Why has God put him in the garden at 2:15 to till it? For all of eternity? Just come out and weed the garden every day? Okay, whatever you say. But when woman shows up, he sees that his gifts are to be put at her service. That's one thing. But woman, if you think about the way in which creation emerges, has never lived in a created order not already inhabited by persons. The first thing she sees is not all the animals. Those are on the periphery of her gaze. The first thing she sees is Adam's face. She knows first the reality of persons. And it's in that moment that Adam knows himself. He doesn't know who he is until he encounters her. Oh, at last, here at last is bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. Their first gift to each other is to recognize each other as persons, equals. The scripture says she's sent as divine aid. Ezer is the word in Hebrew for a helper, and it doesn't mean servant, it means divine aid. But she's also Ezer Kenegdo. Kenegdo is a preposition meaning in front of in a spatial sense. They are face to face in the order of creation. She's not above him. She's not below him. They are face to face. They face this command to fill the earth and subdue it. And I would say in the end, their task is to return all things to Christ.
Oh, wow.
Yes, that's the mission. That's the mission. That's the mission. Absolutely. Of every Christian, return all things to Christ, to whom they originally belonged anyway.
Right.
So men are sort of experts at things. The neuroscience confirms this. And women are more oriented toward persons. Again, the neuroscience confirms this. It doesn't mean that women can't be accountants and men can't be artists. Those are human capacities that both possess. Women are oriented toward persons. So you're asking, what's woman's mission? Her mission, I say, is to remind man that he cannot make of himself a gift to a bottom line or a project, He can only make of himself a gift to another person. So his work must be ordered, and so must hers, toward authentic human flourishing.
And that's in the home and the world, right?
Yes.
I mean, we're looking at this from a modern point of view. Women are everywhere, right? Women are in the home. Women are out of the home. Edith Stein wrote about the gifts that women bring to all of these different dimensions of human society. The home, the workspace, wherever they are, wherever they go, they're caring for whomever in their life and whatever needs there are before them. So your argument would be that the nature of woman in both the home and the world is to complete that mission, to remind men that we are people for each other, that we are complementary, and we are meant to be bringing each other back to God.
Well, that's absolutely right. And there's more, though. This takes some unpacking, but I say that to really follow Mary. She's the icon of the feminine genius, really, right? The epitome of it, the icon of it. Woman's job, woman's task is to bring the divine presence into the world. So I say the debate is not about whether or not women should work outside the home. If they feel called to do so, there's no a substitute for a mommy, so you can't really go until your children are ready for you to do that. But women have a natural right to bring their gifts into the mix of things. But no matter what kind of job she has, no matter what corporate boardroom she walks into, no matter what church office, wherever she ends up in the hierarchy, her task is to bring the divine presence into the room.
Beautiful. That's powerful. That's a powerful task.
Yeah. So there's all this debate. What should women's role be in the church?
Right. There's so much debate. We've all heard it. And I agree, as you do, that there is no replacement for a mother in the home. I'm at home with my 5 children. That might not look the same for everybody. So certainly not saying there's a one size fits all with how that works, but agreeing that the mom's presence is so important to children. And yet there's also this need for women to, as you say, develop the certain gifts that God has specifically given them. And that may work out in so many different ways. Women do have this beautiful mission. And further down that debate, or maybe deeper, is how do they practically live that out, right? So you write that woman is responsible for reminding us all that all human activity is to be ordered toward authentic human flourishing. So this is her mission. How do women discover their particular mission? So we have that overarching mission of woman. Now, the follow-up question would be, how do I, as a woman, each specific woman, live that out in my life? How do I bring that divine presence into the home, into the workspace, into relationships at family dinners with extended family who are outside of the faith or political sphere? How do I, as a woman, live that mission out practically?
Yeah, it's a really big question. Of course, my brain's firing. All the synapses are firing on it. Well, the most immediate thing that comes to mind is the significance, the absolutely critical nature of one's prayer life. You can't give what you don't have.
Amen.
Yeah. Because of our beings are capable of acting. We act all the time. We do stuff. Women are competent. Maybe one way to put it is that no matter what I do it as a mother.
Yes, and I love that.
Yeah, there isn't any way around that. Even if you don't have children, you surely can acquire spiritual children, right? Children that you can care about. I say if there is a Catholic feminism, it's one that is definitely oriented toward the care of all of humanity. It is definitely not only worried about women. It's worried about all of humanity, everyone's children, everyone's husband, everyone's sons and daughters, because women are the guardians of the gift of life, right? Because it's in their bodies that it takes root and grows. So this is a really essential feature of womanhood. And the great tragedy of our era is that we've decided it's not important, or it's just a bother or a burden. Nothing could be further from the truth. So I say this capacity to listen, and not only just to listen, but to hear, to attend to the other, to take notice, nonverbal behaviors, for example, to be more sensitive to their environment, to ensure that people are included, that no one feels left out. These are the gifts that women bring to the tasks of human living. In addition to our professional competence or our ability to get dinner on the table, we also bring this grace, this beauty into the mix that I know real men really appreciate. They don't treat us like that's our obligation.
There should be a proper response, right? If the man is living faithfully, then he should have a proper response to a woman's gift. And that's what John Paul II speaks of over and over again in his work about the proper response of the co-equals. And I know you had also mentioned Gertrude von Lefort and the work that she's done on mother. And I absolutely love how you say that woman is mother in some capacity, whether it's physical, spiritual, both. In every area, she is bringing that gift of the maternal, which the maternal, of course, has this caring concern for all. If you saw all people in all situations as some sort of spiritual children, how differently we as women would respond. And that difference would not be something that would necessarily stretch us out of ourselves, but bring us more into who we are. That's what Lefort really would say, right? The more we realize that, the more we become who we were meant to be, and the more we feel that our mission is being realized through rising to that call.
Yes, absolutely. I hate to keep bringing up the word feminism, but I want to again, because I want to say I'm the most radical feminist I know, because I absolutely do not apologize or regret my womanhood in any way.
It does make you radical.
I know.
And even saying that you are a woman makes you radical.
That's
you're
really
claiming
astonishing.
to be a woman, right? So in some areas, that's radical right there.
Yeah, of course.
You didn't realize how radical you were, Deborah.
No, I know. I'm really interested, and have been since I was in high school, in what it meant to be a woman, and then on top of that, a Catholic woman. What does that mean to be a Catholic woman? And in the end, the real driving force behind that question is, what does it mean to be me?
Yes.
Who am I?
Right. It comes down to that.
Yeah. How can I live out my womanhood in a way that God had in mind when he created me? It's a principle of the natural law that we're born already in debt to our Creator for the gift of life. And the only way to repay that debt is to become that person God had in mind when he created me.
Oh, wow. Deborah, that just blew my mind. I never really thought of it as repaying the debt of being given life personally by God. That is incredibly profound. In speaking to women, one of the things that I've encountered is that idea of the singular me. How do I live this out, right? I'm understanding all of these things in my head of who woman is, and I'm understanding what our mission is and our role. And now it's reducing down to the specifics. How does woman understand that when she has been maybe raised by generations of women who have embraced this non-life-giving, non-maternal, women that have not been raised in a maternal home, particularly, and certainly not a maternal society? How does a woman begin to understand what it even means to be maternal when she's not had that really modeled in any area? I guess you would say to return to the Blessed Mother.
Yes, I think that would help. But of course, not everybody is likely to do that. So the fundamental question for all of us is, who am I? And I don't mean that in an individualistic way or solipsistic or anything. I mean, what makes me sad about young people these days is that they don't have that question anymore. Who am I? And what is the meaning of my life? What is the meaning of my life? They don't pause to experience the great mystery of human existence. It's a kind of crazy thing, don't you think? Every once in a while,
I do.
This kind of spooky feeling like, what am I doing? What are we all doing? And really, everything starts there. So returning to a fundamental question about who am I? What's the meaning of my life? What is it that I really want? can be the start of something because it opens me up to the possibilities. The people that you're talking about are trapped in an ideology. They're thinking the answer is out there, or it's going to be found in carefully articulated arguments about this, that, and the other thing, when actually God holds us in existence every moment of every day. C.S. Lewis says something so profound. You've never met a mere mortal.
Wow.
We have this great destiny, and that's been pushed aside in this relentless pursuit of the right ideology. We're trying to think it through in our heads instead of being present to myself right now. And even talking about it that way makes me feel nervous because it seems to fall into the trap of the individualism, self-centeredness that governs our culture. That's not how I mean it. It's like a question with no answer.
Well, it's a question that points towards God, right? Towards creation, the creation of self and the creation, as you say, of man in general, looking back to Genesis. I mean, if we look at our own, it should be that when we look at ourselves, then that leads us to the bigger picture. Why am I here? Why are we all here? Why were we created? Who created us? Yeah, it should lead, right?
So
logically, it should lead us to God. In the end.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it does, because in the end, there's no other explanation. The most rational position is to believe that there is a God, because unless there is, none of this makes any sense.
Right. Then we're all just wasting our time. Yeah, we're
we should just
wasting our time.
Forget about this pursuit of truth. Who cares? Let's all move to Hawaii and surf. No, the human beings are clearly driven to understand, to become. They have a telos built into their very being. And the tragedy of our era is that people are trying to invent their own meaning instead of understanding that the meaning is discoverable. It's not, I don't create it, I discover it. And I discover it by living in this body. Not trying to make my body into someone else's. I live in this body, and my soul, says Aquinas.
Right.
We're both meant for me. And when I go to the pearly gates and knock on the door, I don't go as an androgynous creature, says Aquinas. I go as me. God's going to ask me, were you a good woman? He's not going to ask me if you were a good human being. Did you feed the poor? Yes, he's going to ask those questions, I guess, from what I hear. But
tell us more, Deborah.
Here's what I hear. Have you got the scuttlebutt? No, but Aquinas is very clear about this. He's asking the question, what is it that actually goes with the soul to heaven? Does my gender go? He says absolutely. Yeah. The soul itself is human, but if it's embodied in a female body or a male body, over time it takes on, like a glove would to a hand, the features of femininity. When I go to heaven, I go as a woman. And so the big question is, how do I become a real woman? I'm absolutely certain that woman's task is to remind everyone of the importance of human life, of human existence, and to bring into every room, every corporate room, every meeting room, every classroom, every home, something filled with grace.
Amen.
Woman is made for that.
Yes. Everything that you said is so powerful and so much to digest. I'm so thankful for you sharing all your wisdom. One of the things that I've discovered in the past several years, at first I thought it was just understanding who I was as a woman, but now I've realized that's going to be a constant discovery through the rest of my life. It's not just understanding, okay, here's who I am as woman, here's what woman is and what it means, here's the gifts of the feminine genius, here's how they're lived out. This is constantly being developed and uncovered throughout my lifetime. As you said, your soul is taking on that form. And the more we are in prayer, the more that we're in communication with God, the more that we're learning and understanding. What I've realized is that I'm constantly learning my own womanhood, my own feminine genius. It's like it's never going to be fully understood. Even when I go up to heaven, God willing, I'm still only going to have developed a glimpse of my own feminine genius.
this is kind of important because I think von Balthasar is again helpful. He acknowledges that it's difficult to talk about the differences between men and women without getting into dangerous territory, And there are people who say you really can't articulate any of that, but he says, no, men and women are mysteries. Why? Because we're made in the image of a God who is a mystery. And we have somehow found ways to talk about God, though, in ways that are intelligent and responsible, respectful of the difference between us and God and so on. He says, of course we can say things about man and woman, but he says, don't be looking for the final reduction where everything clicks into place. Man is this, woman is that. You'll never be able to do that. And it's a false errand. It's not necessary. Man and woman are together in a kind of dance. We're images of the Trinity, right? And the persons of the Trinity are always in movement, always giving, always receiving. And so it's really a tragedy and sacrilegious to try to boil it down. Men are this, women are that, when actually what we are is mysteries, and we're in this eternal dance. You notice in your own marriage, I'm sure, that some days you do this, some days your husband does that, right? It's never always the same, or it's not rigid, right? And there's this sense in the ways in which my sort of, I don't want to go cosmic on you or new agey, but the way in which our energies kind of blend, we just know what needs to be done and what needs to be said in different ways. And so he says the final completion that we picture when we talk about the complementarity of man and woman, we will never see it because that is God's work. And he's the one that completes it. He's the missing link. Yes, he's the missing link. In the marital act, God is there. A child is conceived, God is there. God is watching and helping us blend our gifts to his glory.
Right. Well, Deborah, we've talked about surfing, we've talked about dancing, all in the context of theology.
Yeah.
I want to thank you so much for being here and for your work in beginning this new Institute for the Study of Man and Woman at Franciscan University of Steubenville.
Yes, it's my honor, and I hope you all attend all our events. And by the way, if anyone wants to donate, we're open for business.